Hello, everyone. Sorry, I finally got all my buttons pushed. Hello, hello. Nice, everyone's coming in. Whew.
How's it going, everybody?
Hello, hi.
What's up?
We're about halfway to what our RSVPs say.
Yeah.
Let's see, what do we have going on in the back? Why don't we get started? So if you haven't already, click on your group chat icon or your chat icon. That way you can see the group chat, and then click on participants so you can activate, or so the button for raise hand appears. We'll go from there. I'll probably make this announcement again at the end if we have more people. If not, then I won't need to. But there's been a few people who have asked why we're not jumping up in our account status where we can have 300 people versus the 100. And I'm keeping it that way just so that the intimacy of the conversations stays small. One of the bigger feedbacks that I always hear from the convention is that the groups are too large, and whether we're intimidated or we just don't feel like we should, or whatever this case may be, I want to keep the group small so that we can have conversations versus just people talking, if that makes sense. It just also gives a value to the seat that you get to the table, because these seats aren't very valuable at that. So we encountered yesterday for the first time, and I didn't know this was the thing, that I guess if a video link is clicked on X amount of times, it'll actually pause it out and say that you need to come back at a later time to view the video. So I don't know if I can find a loophole around that, or if that's just something that we're going to have to encounter if we encounter it. And then, but we'll see how that goes going forward. But other than that, Blue, that's all you, bud.
All right, cool. So what's going on, everybody? hope to have a really good discussion here. I know I've seen like today the numbers grew a lot, so and we're expecting more. So hopefully some people come in and hope to have a good conversation. I encourage a lot of participation because that keeps the flow going. I think last week was a lot better than the first week. It was like, I almost didn't want to stop, like, getting information and stuff like that because it was a really good conversation. So you guys participating really helps. So today, kind of, I would say like the icebreaker I'll do today is who is your favorite discus thrower and why, male and female throwers? So you'll basically say a male and a female thrower, and then I'll take around like 3 participants, and then we'll move on into the actual discussion. So how that works, you just basically raise your hand, or you can put it in the chats. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so you can raise your hand if you guys are ready. If you want to go ahead and give your spiel. Don't all raise it at one time. Oh, okay. Go ahead, Tom. And then I'll go with Dan and David. Because I know Tom didn't know, he probably didn't know how to raise his hand in there, but I seen him go like this. Or do you want?
Tom, you have to unmute yourself. Click the mute button.
You have to unmute yourself. You know how to do that? All right. I'll come back to you until you figure out how to unmute yourself. But I don't know if you're on your iPad or phone, but you should be able to do it. If you're on a laptop, you should be able to go to the far left corner and it says mute and click the button. Bottom left corner. Dan, go ahead. Dan Mecca.
Hey, Blue, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
All right. As far as favorite male thrower, I'd say Mac Wilkins. One of the things about Mac, he was so dynamic and able to throw anything and everything. And I think that really helped him overall as being a very dynamic discus thrower. And it showed in just his ability to perform at the big meets, at the Olympics, at the NCAA championships, the world championships. And then on the women's side, there's a couple of throwers. One of them I really like is Susie Powell, just because she did not fit the mold or the body shape of what you would presume was a typical female discus thrower. Again, a very dynamic thrower, and just showed her athleticism, something I really try to work with my athletes.
Thanks. David, go ahead.
I'd have to go with Mac Wilkins. I like how he was just able to always get long out the front. And then Sandra Perkovic. I think she has an amazing pop right at the finish, especially going into a non-reverse finish. So I really like watching that and watching a lot of her videos that she does, a lot of unconventional work that she puts in during her season.
And then, Tom, did you figure it out?
I think so. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, well, my favorite guy is Al Order. Of course, when you're as old as I am, you remember the old timers. But 4 gold medals and 4 in a row. I don't think there's anyone else who's done that. And of course, on the women's side, I have really 3 because I've been involved with some of them. Carol Cady, who was an American record holder, Lacey Barnes, and Lorna Griffin. All 3 outstanding. Lorna, first American woman to throw over 200 feet. So again, going back a few years, but still fresh in my memory.
Yeah. This Tom Pagani, right?
Correct.
All right, cool. Good to have you on. I'm glad you came in.
Thank you.
Legendary Fresno State coach. I want to talk to you for a little bit. Yeah. So yeah. I would say for me, I think one of mine is Daniel Stahl. I think more because I got to see him throw a lot in person because he's always here in California. And he's just like, I think he's not, I would say, like a lot of people, not the slimmest guy in the world. So he's more, he represents a guy like me who throws disc, though he's like 6'9" or whatever. But but yeah, so I like him a lot. Females, I like Yasmin Perez. She's super dynamic and fast, and I just like the way she competes and stuff like that, and also Sandra Perkovic. So moving forward, let's go get into the actual discussion. So basically, how we're gonna do this. Let me go ahead and go into the agenda. If you guys don't have the agenda, it's on the files in the group me. I'll put it on there so you know like kind of how the flow's going, and we're not just bouncing around everywhere. And last week we did a lot better at that too. So that's the second one. There you go. So, what are some points to work on? Starting the first part of the conversation is basically the entry. So we're coming out the back of the ring in discus. What are some things that you coaches are specifically working on that you guys got to have your athletes or should be important for athletes to try to have going on off the back? If you guys will volunteer. Dan, did you raise your hand again, or you never put it down? All right, go ahead, Alex.
All right. So for me in the back, it's all about finding balance. So for me, it's just whatever the athlete's more comfortable with. You know, if they're more comfortable with, establishing a good left side axis, or if they have to be kind of a split of 50-50 weight on the left and right. That's really the big thing for me. The second part of that is understanding the drive leg action. Understanding that the right leg doesn't cut in tight. It has to go out and around the left side to really set up a good entry into the discus.
Thanks, Alex. Anybody else want to talk about some things that we maybe missed? Ethan, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in what I call getting left, setting up the axis over top of the left foot. So making sure you get basically your left knee over top of your left toe and your left armpit over top of your left knee and toe. So trying to achieve that entry, very much all your weight on the left foot. As you're entering in, get left for the thrower, move their whole body left over to the left side.
What about does anybody know or want to give input on like kind of like posture wise or anything? Go ahead, John. You on, John? Coach Prescott?
John, you're still muted.
Yeah, you're still muted.
How's that?
There you go. You're on.
Okay. What's up, coaches? One of the things that I tried one of the problems actually that two of my best throwers have is in the entry coming out of the back. What I tell them is to try and use the entire circle, get bigger, or a wider sweep, and to stop throwing in a phone booth. It looked like I like the way I describe it is like, why aren't you using the entire circle? And you look like you're throwing it inside of a phone booth. And so that's been kind of like something that I've been working on with my throwers lately.
Thanks. Anybody else? Go ahead, Luigi.
Hi everyone. One thing I guess I've found to work a lot, working with my athletes and and myself too, is that coming out of the back, I am a firm believer on getting over the left and staying well balanced. But I've also played around on how to get, I guess, more drive out of the back. I guess before in the past, I used to believe, there has to be some sort of push off that left leg, which had some results, but I wanted to find a little bit something else to where I guess it was required less intensity or less energy. So um, speaking to a good guy that I used to work with, Brent Noon, he mentioned stuff that he used to work with Randy Barnes back in the day, which was sitting back on the left hip. And that kind of helped for me and my other athletes get some sort of linear force heading down the direction towards the sector, to where I didn't really need to think about pushing off or anything. I just need to make sure that I was over the left, over my left axis, and that way I can set the hips back to get me that drive coming into that direction towards the sector. So that was one thing I played around with and I really enjoyed. I know Coach V, who works with Daniel Stahl and Gerd Cantor, he also talked about the body, primarily the hips. There's a slight fallback coming out of the back, which creates that sort of a linear drive. But that's one thing I really enjoyed, and I talk about it a lot with my athletes, and that's kind of my big thing of coming out of the back.
Thanks, Luigi. David?
Yeah, a lot of the same things that everyone is working on. Particularly agree with Coach Prescott. Trying to get over the left and getting around the left, and then making sure that we're trying to stay long and sweeping the right leg into the middle and pushing the left arm out. So we're trying to make ourselves longer before we hit the middle. So just to do that, but we got to have balance first, and some kinesthetic awareness of our limbs and where they're at. So, but that's what I work on a lot with a lot of my athletes, particularly if they were a better shot putter or something like that. They like to stay a little bit tighter, and we're trying to get them a little bit longer in the disc.
Frankie?
Good morning, everybody. Coach Frankie at Hartnell College, if you guys don't know me. So a couple of things that I actually work on is establishing and having them understand more stretch reflex out of the back. So flexibility, hurdle mobility is huge for me. So understanding that they pivot on the inside of their foot rather than the outside, which causes them to fall over in the ring or dive in. Especially for beginners, they don't really understand the concept of getting on the left. So having their hips neutral when they start versus having them kind of sway open, how everyone likes to kind of crank the discus back. What that actually creates is a super like elongated position out of the back where they have to sweep for longer. A lot of coaches kind of miss that just because it's not something you really think about too often. But once you have your hips too far to the right, you're allowing the athlete to, again, have a more elongated sweep, which for professionals or more experienced discus throwers is generally okay. But when you get to more intermediate towards the beginning throwers, they always see crank the discus as far back as possible, but they don't notice what the hips are doing. So definitely going back into getting or sitting on your hip, getting that stretch from your hip, and just using your natural anatomy to kind of throw that discus out of the back of the ring, versus kind of muscling it or trying to swing your left arm open. I'm a huge believer in keeping a bit more relaxed with the arm, allow your legs to do more of the work. One thing I actually wanted to bring up since we're talking out of the back of the ring is stability with the left arm. So keeping it neutral. So I actually was listening to a podcast like a week or two ago, and it was Susie Powell, and she was talking about stability out of the back of the ring with her left arm. So she started experimenting with keeping her left arm or palm up to help her stay neutral. That's not something I personally do.
No.
So her reasoning behind this is if you twist the arm up, then it moves your elbow up, and it also stabilizes the shoulder area for not dipping down. So if you think about it, if your hand going down, you have more likelihood to having to dip down with your left side. You talked to her posture. I think for most part is neutral or straight as possible. But I think definitely could be incorporated more into a stylistic, just because there are people that kind of escapes my mind, but his technique like just blows my mind. It kind of does a roller coaster effect out of the back. It starts his discus super tall, super high, kind of sweeps in the middle. It's like it's just this roller coaster thing I just strongly dislike, but I would say it's a bit more stylistic. Definitely not as, I would say, as extreme over the left as the shot put, for sure. But I think that would be more the interpretation of the coach and or the athlete's physical abilities to be able to perform that out of the back. So, if you're more strength-based, you may not get as much stretch reflex out of the back as someone like Mac Wilkins. Mac Wilkins is, in my opinion, one of the more fluid and technical throwers that I've ever seen. I've actually had a chance to train with Mac Wilkins when he was at Concordia, Oregon, and some of this stuff was awesome. But I see some of the bigger guys having an issue with flexibility, especially in the hip area. So stretch reflex out of the back for them is a little bit harder. And also we have to talk about size. So taller guys can generally be a little bit taller out of the back of the ring and be okay with that. Shorter guys definitely have to focus on getting more on that left side. Definitely trying to get more of that stretch reflex out of the back of the ring. Depending on the level you're working with, I don't really get very many guys that are over 6 foot. I get 5'9", 5'11". If I'm lucky, I'll get a 6'2" guy. But that's just me because I'm at the junior college level, right? The majority of discus throwers will be 6'2", 6'4", average 6'4", I want to say. So you definitely would want to see who you're working with, I want to say, just because I think that's my theory, that the left or the shorter guys, you want to have them, shorter girls as well, have them definitely harder over the left side. But it all depends also on their physical ability, where you have throwers. I feel like Valerie Allman, she's doing a really good job. She's a shorter thrower. She gets over the left, but not like super crazy, like shot put over the left, in my opinion. So those are just my thoughts on the back of the ring with the disc.
Thank you. Jordy?
So I like to just to go over like what everybody's been saying with getting over the left, just to bring it back over to posture and things like that. I always like to relate it back to the pistol squat. So a lot of people, when they start with discus, when you think about getting over the left, you'll see a lot of people reaching over to the left, which is good. They want to get long and get their left arm long over to the left. But I think about the pistol squat, and first we'll have them stand still with their feet about shoulder width or a little bit wider than shoulder width, and I'll just tell them to do a pistol squat. So naturally, the first thing they have to do is to shift their hip over to whatever leg they're going to do and do that pistol squat. So I do that so they can realize that you have to actually shift your hips over that left foot before you actually turn. You can't just reach your shoulders and your arm over. So as you're winding out of the back with the discus, and then you start coming back over to the left, you're using that time to come over to the left with your upper body. While you're doing that, you're still shifting your hips over to that left foot. So again, I just bring it to the pistol squat, make sure they sit down and realize that once you're getting ready to get over that left, you have to actually shift your hips over to that left foot and get that knee down before you actually push off of it.
Thank you. Shaun, go ahead.
Just unmuting. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, okay. First, quickly, Coach Pagani, TP, my old coach, just want to say hi to him. And also, I've been trying to send him messages to mute his microphone because his face keeps popping up every time he makes a sound. So the video follows. So I'm just trying to teach him how to use Zoom. So just want to correct a couple of things, or at least point out a couple of things from my point of view. And a couple of people have mentioned Daniel Stahl and Viestin Hafsteinson. I work very closely with those guys. As far as Viestin talks about, he doesn't talk about sitting out of the back. He doesn't talk about sitting on the left. For him, the most important thing and the biggest issue is not to break the left hip, not to let the hip fall back, not to let the weight. And so, with Daniel, but also with Gerd Kanter, 80% of what they work on in training, literally 80% of what he works on with all of the athletes is not to break the left hip, about the left hip movement as it comes around out of the back, not to sit back and bend at the hip, but to hold the hip strong so that as you turn around, the knee goes down and the hip is still back. And so that way you push off the quad, you can sprint, and then you can sweep with the right leg. So you get both forces. You get the left leg push. So he talks about a sprint across, and it's very much based on John Powell. Everyone in America I know tries to copy Mac Wilkins. Those of us that are old enough to know, and TP, we work very closely with John. He was my coach when I was at Stanford, and but also worked with Viestin and other people. And 80% of what Viestin does with Gerd and with Daniel is based on John Powell, which is this turn and sprint. So it's more of a left-to-left approach and not a right leg kick. So he turns and pushes off the left foot. Carol Cady, former American record holder, was a perfect example of this. Turn and sprint out of the back. And that's all about this left hip not collapsing underneath it. And even Mac, when he talks about turning out of the back, he used to do something, and he actually taught Danny Samuels, and Danny Samuels is one of the few people that does something different in the women's discus, and she actively uses a sit back but not sit down. And the difference is Mac talks about a 9 o'clock drop. As you turn around, you get to 9 o'clock and you push back. And if you watch Danny Samuels, she actively pushes herself back across the circle, giving her speed across. That doesn't mean the butt is sitting down. That means the shoulders are going back. So you create tension. The hip is still strong, but you push back out of the back to give yourself speed across. And that's where Danny gets so much force out of the back. And it comes from Mac. But a lot of people try to follow Mac, but many have tried in the last 30 years. And from a global point of view, the Americans haven't performed as they should have done on global discus, mainly because they're trying to copy Mac. And I love Mac, and I speak to him regularly. I messaged him, we were talking yesterday, in fact. He's doing a presentation for us. But not even Mac teaches people to throw like Mac. Yeah. He doesn't do that because he's unique, and many people have tried to copy it, and it's just not possible. And he was pretty special, and it was a special time, and a lot of the things that he was able to do, a lot of people have tried, but they don't have his physical skills and able to get out of that. So for me, the most important thing at the entry is to turn around the left foot, turn around the left side, the left hip, and not to let it break. So then you can push off and you can have a wide sweep, and you can add to it with the right leg. But it's most important to have the hip forwards and underneath you and keep strong. Hope that makes sense.
Makes sense. That kind of philosophy is kind of what I teach majority of my athletes. Sometimes it just depends on who it is. But majority, like that John Powell, like everything you're saying, I'm like, I get it, because that's the first person I remember back in the day on YouTube. That was the only video that was on YouTube as far as throwing training. So I remember in high school, I'm watching John Powell. He's teaching you how to do souths and all that good stuff and how to push off and all that. And that's kind of who I related to, besides Coach Bedard also too at Colorado State. So yeah, so we'll go ahead and move on. We kind of spoke on this a little bit as we're talking about getting out the back, but I put south position because I wanted to break it down from like if I'm thinking about the back, I'm thinking about like from the wind until I get left and get the right out. But now that we're out on our left and the right is out and we're getting ready to go we're in that south position. We haven't got to the drive phase where our right's moving toward the middle yet. What is the posture? What is the feeling that athletes want to have coming out the back to the middle, but haven't exactly like got to the middle yet? Anybody will put some input on there. Ethan, go ahead.
I would say probably one of the biggest things to feel at that point when the sort of in the South African position, right leg's moved out 90 degrees, is patience. Just being there and taking your time. We've brought up Mac Wilkins a bunch of times. He's told me the longer he felt like he could stay there, his idea was sort of I'd get out and put my crotch on top of my foot, and the longer I could stay there, the better throw it would be. So I think a lot of people get to that point and then they want to get out of the back a little too quick. Being there and being patient, let the right foot come out around 180 degrees before you start trying to rush out is probably the most important thing at that exact point that you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things I always think about, so I compare this with a hammer and disc and shot, rotational shot. As far as when you're in that position, or like thinking about your left side as the steering wheel and your right side as the motor. So if I'm in that position, in the south position, and my left foot stops, or my left foot stops at that angle from where I'm going to drive through, I'll tell my athletes to kind of feel that, like, know when your left is supposed to continue, your left foot, not necessarily your left arm, because I kind of teach my guys to open up the left arm and get through. And some people just teach them to hold it. It just depends on who it is. But more of your left foot being direction, because you always get, especially with young athletes, you always get those young athletes that will continue to over-rotate and stay on their left long because they didn't get that weight on their left, or they didn't stop their left to get down the line. And I remember, like we talked about too, with Mac Wilkins, he had like a video, an old video. It was about why like Reese Hoffa and maybe I think Cantwell and all them consistently throw over 20 meters or 21 meters. And it was about getting down that line and basically like holding that line point from your left side. But yeah, go ahead, April.
Yeah, I agree with you, Lou. 90% of the time, kids over-rotate that left foot. And that also comes to what you're using as a control to move across. And I think this is, like, I kind of spoke about it a little bit in Hammer. I'm a firm believer if the kids don't know what muscle group makes the movement, they're going to have flaws that they can't correct unless you can teach them which muscle groups to use. And so when they're driving out of the back, allowing that knee and left foot, big toe, so to speak, stay lined up as that right leg drives and comes around and lengthens. The other thing I like to really focus on is, like Shaun said, dropping the knee. I really, really, really focus on what their shin angle looks like. If they have a shin angle that's way too high, you're going to have a kid that's driving up, not linear. And so you're going to really struggle getting that kid to feel linear, and you're going to struggle having a kid have a low, strong power position simply because when they're driving out of the back, they're driving up, they're not driving linear. And so having that hip stay back, like as Shaun described, is the only way to allow that knee to drop low. Because if your hip gets ahead of the knee, the only muscle that gets to work at that point is going to be the quad. And at that point, you don't want the quad having any movement. You want the quad being more dormant and kind of locked in place on that left leg, and allowing that right leg to use its groin to allow for stretch reflex through your hips. And that's another thing I think kids make a big mistake coming out of the back, is they're using their quad and hip flexor in order to make their sweep. It is not derived from the quad or the hip. The sweep motion is derived from your groin. And so a lot of times you got kids doing a South African facing the direction they want to go. So when they move that leg, they're doing a front kicking motion rather than actually having that heel lead them on their right leg in order to create stretch reflex through the hips. So now when that leg snaps and turns, that's what essentially can help lift that leg and keep that hip and crotch area, so to speak, the inner side of your box, tighten together to create that stretch reflex and get kids into a better position to actually use the rubber band effect.
Thanks. Moving on to like the drive phase. Like what April was saying, one of the things I've noticed from like coming out the back from the south position into the drive phase, when those kids don't have that shin angle, anytime those kids go up and try to drive out the back and end up driving up, their right always stops in the middle, and that stops the rotation in the middle to continue your hips and foot, toe, knee, hip to get all the way through. And that's one thing I have to work with, like a lot of my young kids, because they don't even feel it. Like they don't feel themselves like drive up. I'm like, you're driving up. But a lot of the stuff that you have to figure out with those kids, like we talked about out the back and all that stuff, it's always the thing that happens before in almost in every event. It's not the exact thing. Like if I tell them they're driving up, it's not. I can't tell them just about driving up. I got to tell them what happened before that almost made them drive up. And that's one thing I have to figure out as a coach. Can anybody give some input about what they think should be going on during the drive phase with your left and right leg, posture, hips, all that stuff? Continuing on it. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, we try to really work that left side and push. I tell our guys, try to push with the left foot till the right foot hits the center. So and then you're sweeping the right leg, almost like a soccer style kick, where you're going to sweep and get that right abductor, that right foot, the right shin, sweeping across the circle as you're pushing with the left leg. So you're working both legs together. And that's where you're going to create a lot more force getting across the circle. I found that we'll do a bunch of drills where we'll tell the kids, stay on that left foot till the right foot hits the center. That lowers that shin. That gets that shin almost parallel to the circle as you're pushing out of the back with that left leg. And then sweeping the right leg or kicking that right leg like a soccer style kick makes that right foot very active in the middle of the circle. So I found that really helps our guys to get into a very good power position, and then that right foot's active, getting right up on top of the legs into the center. And sweeping the hips and sweeping that right leg keeps great posture too. If your hips are moving forward, your upper body's staying up. You're not getting bent over, you're not falling into the circle, you're driving through the circle.
Thank you. Shaun, go ahead.
Or he's slow to unmute. Yeah, just picking up that right leg sweep, like kicking a soccer ball for you, American type. Side footing a soccer ball is very important. Keeping the toe up and the heel down so that you're hitting the inside, the instep. But the most important thing, and again, just following up on what April said, and I like a lot of what she was saying and follow it the same way. It's interesting as you turn and push out the left. She says she wants to keep the quad relaxed. If your knee is down and your hip is forward, you actually create stretch reflex in the quad, and therefore you don't have to use it. It's there and it's free energy. If you understand muscle slings, and I know there's some people on here that talk a lot about developing the white fibers. That's something that's very interesting for me. Sorry?
Can you repeat that part you just said?
Yeah, so if you understand the use of muscle slings, right? Muscle slings is the use of the fibrous connections, the white fibers. So rather than the muscles, if you focus on the white fibers that connect the muscles, so the muscles can hold it strong, you get power out of the white fibers. You get stretch reflex from the tendons. And so by creating tension in a position, and that's why it's important not to break the hip, to keep the hip forwards out of the back, then you have this muscle sling right from the foot all the way through the knee, hip forwards, all the way through the chest. All that is under tension. So when you increase that tension by dropping the knee down, by trying to increase that shin angle, get it lower and sprint across, what you're doing is getting that fibrous connection to stretch, and then it gives you energy back. So you use that by pushing that hip forwards to get that stretch reflex in the quad. You don't have to actually use it. It's there, and it gets you that kick across. It drives across. And at the same time, because you're in a very stable position, you can then sweep the right leg. So you get both forces going across. It's very important to deliver force in the direction of throw, and that's the most effective way also biomechanically to do it. But more importantly, it's the fastest way to do it. Yeah, we're not talking about muscle contraction. We're not trying to move the finger as fast as we can on the muscle contraction. That's not very quick. But if you use stretch reflex, you get an awful amount of power from it. So to learn to tap into the white fibers and the stretch reflex, also out of the back of the circle. That's why this left hip is so important, to keep that under tension and keep that strong, so that you get the drive off the left without having to use the muscles. And then you can use that right leg sweep to give yourself force across. And then you can use that reaction that you get with the left foot coming down at the front very quickly to then apply force into the delivery. So it's a very important part. I'm looking for some film. I've got a pretty special film of Daniel Stahl that many people may not have seen, and some close-up pictures. I've got a 73-meter throw. It's a throw from from the Diamond League, and some of the things people might be able to see it, but I don't know if I can share it on here. So
yeah,
I'll look around.
Be able to please, if you find it or if you have it, you should share your screen.
All right.
Yeah,
I'll come back if I can find. I'm looking for a couple of
your
things.
hand and then go ahead and pick up back off, because I'm sure every coach will love to hear and see all that. Go ahead, Ethan.
So sort of elaborating on what you said about something happening before and what Shaun was just saying, to me, I almost never talk about driving across the circle with anyone, especially young athletes that I'm teaching to throw the discus, because they end up doing what you were just saying. They end up jumping or coming up. They're trying to drive. They're trying to push themselves across the circle. And what I just said a little bit ago about being in the south position of being patient. Most kids get there, and if they're thinking about driving across, they want to get to that spot and push from their leg. So instead, it's about setting up that position, being patient, getting into the position where you get that sling stretch reflex that Shaun was just talking about, and using the right leg. And then the drive kind of happens on its own. Like Bruce Lee used to like to say, when I punch, I do not punch. It punches all by itself, right? And that's a thing that I like, that you get there and the stretch happens and the stretch hits you and you get that faster move better than if you're trying to drive yourself. But if you're telling a kid to drive, they're going to start driving and pushing, and they're not going to get themselves to actually get into that stretch and reflex.
I think a lot of that, like you said, I agree. I think a lot of that is timing too, them understanding. I think I would say timing and energy. If I can get my young athlete to understand energy throughout their body, when something's on the right, the feeling on the left, coming off, what that's supposed to feel like, and then the timing of like when I'm going to push off. I can still teach them to push off. They just have to know exactly when they're pushing off. The young athletes, they don't know, so they think all we tell them is push off, and they don't know exactly the timing of it. So they come out the back, and then they're just thinking about pushing off their left, and they have no rotational energy. They don't have the timing of when to do it, and it becomes like harder. So that's why, like I always say, I love coaching my athletes in detail and showing them in pictures and like trying to get them. And it might not happen that day, might not happen that month, but it might happen in the second year to where they're like, Coach, I know what the hell you're talking about, you know. And that's the best thing, you know. But yeah, working on those things. Thanks for your input. Go ahead, April.
As you were saying, when you weren't sure of when to tell the athlete to drive the left, or I don't really think about it as an action that left foot should be doing. I'm glad Shaun explained what I meant by the relaxed quad, because by having that so stretched and dormant in a sense, all you essentially have to do is pick it up. There doesn't need to be any kind of flexion through the foot. You literally just have to pick it up. And once you pick it up, that releases just like a slingshot. When you pull the slingshot back and you let go, that's what picking up that left foot. There's no flexion through the foot. It's literally just letting go of the ground.
Yeah.
And once you let go of that, it just happens. And as long as your athletes can keep their right or their left butt cheek under control, because I think that's the other major flaw with our athletes, is they don't know what muscle to use to pick that left leg up and move that left leg through the circle. And so they have a tendency to flex their butt and their hamstring. Well, once they do that, it forces an open center. They have to open the center, because now the chain of command through the muscles react up through the spine. Well, if you stand in your home right now and you flex, you get in a power position, you flex your left butt cheek, it automatically pulls the shoulders open. And so if you can get your athletes to know that when you pick that left foot up, you have to really squeeze your crotch together, your groins, your left and right groin, and squeeze them together. And that allows for a much longer pull. It allows for the discus to stay as far back as possible to create the stretch reflex through the arm and the core. And so a lot of this is we're telling our athletes the correct like technique, like you want to get off the left and here, but nobody is explaining to those athletes what muscles to use. Exactly. Because our bodies are created geniusly. If one muscle isn't working, something else just helps out, and we got this little community of muscles that help everybody try to achieve the same goal, but not every muscle has the proper technical qualities in order to achieve the maximum effort. And so unless you teach those athletes what muscles they're supposed to use, no matter what cue you use, they're going to have a flaw somewhere in the center, and it's generally they're open and they cannot stay closed no matter what they try to do. So
yeah, I think I understand what you're saying, April. I would say a lot of that, what you're saying, like the groin and the core, super important. I think in almost every field event period that they understand that helps them so much with posture. It helps them so much with feeling, especially with the young athletes. If they're not using their core or understanding what muscles, they fall out of position, or they do all these things where like they lose that what do you call that hip engagement type feeling or all that. It just, especially with like the field event, using your core is super important. And I think a lot of the young athletes never even think about it. They just go out and think you got to throw. And that's when they end up having all that super left side energy throughout the whole throw. It's all left side all the way to they land wide open and they're throwing all left side, and nothing was actually held with tension and allowing that right side to work. Go ahead, Ryan.
One thing real quick, not to interrupt you, Ryan. A cue you can use to your kids, because most kids only think their core is their abs, is the muscle groups that are as close to their spine as possible is what's going to create the tightest center. And so when an athlete will think about that, the closest muscles to the spine is going to be that basically your crotch and your pushing motions that you use on the inside of your body. And so, the muscles that help you not pee your pants, type thing, those are the terms that I have to use with my younger kids, because they don't, you know, if you use the actual words of those muscles, they're going to be like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about.
Yeah.
And so use those terms, you know, your pooping muscles and your pushing muscles. And, you know, that's why it's important that you fart in the center of the circle. If you've ever done that, you're using the right muscle groups, and kids laugh. And once they laugh, they'll never forget anything that you say. And so anyway, I apologize, Ryan.
Go ahead, Ryan.
No worries. Yeah, so just kind of thinking about the relax and when to relax and when to move. I think we've all probably had those athletes that are really gung-ho. They want to go fast. And to them, fast means just, you know, trying to go as hard as they can and never finding that spot where they just relax and then let the stretch happen. And so one thing, a couple athletes that I tried this with that really helped was when I explained, like, you know, there's a time when we go fast and there's a time when we try to relax more. You know, attack not straight out of the back. Don't try and go as fast as possible right when you start. You know, wait until you get to the middle, and then that's when you can attack the throw more and try and be faster. Try and get your left foot to the front of the ring faster. I think that's a time when you can be a little more active, you know, not use a stretch reflex, but you actually do have to be somewhat active with your left foot, trying to get it to the front. And so just trying to explain to athletes when is the appropriate time to attack and when is the appropriate time to relax. I know I find myself a lot of the time using a lot more spatial cues, telling them what positions to be in, telling them, you know, we need to be here or there. But really, I think that as time goes on, you know, they have found correct positions more or less, but it's the timing of those positions that you really have to figure out. So trying to understand when the right time is to use a spatial cue and when is the right time to use a temporal cue, so that you can get athletes to attack and relax at the right time is something that I've found to be pretty useful.
Thanks. Shaun, you got the film? You think you can share it now?
Yeah, let me just try and see if I can show a couple of things that might help you guys. So let me see if, can you guys see this?
Yep.
So this is Rob Soufflon, who Coach Pagani will know, but this is just kind of my picture in my head. This is a shot put image, but this is what I mean about left knee down, hip forwards, this backward C that we're talking about here. Yeah, so the knee down, the low shin angle, the hip forward, so you're not breaking at the hip. This is creating stretch all the way through these tendons, all the way through here, right? From this left foot, so the hallucis longus goes underneath the foot and pushes for the toe. So if you create stretch all around here, then the natural thing is then this is just going to push you across. But it's also a very stable position from where you can initiate this big right leg wide sweep that we also want to give. So we get both forces going across. So this is a John Powell sprint across the circle, push to push. So it's left foot to left foot. You just think about pushing your left foot to the front as quickly as possible. So that was the idea in this image. So then you can add to it. So you get double forces going across because you get a big right leg sweep and all that potential energy that gives you, and that rotational in the end, in the center, but you've got that sprint from the left to left. So I hope that clarifies. I know April was talking about this, and this is always the image in my head, so I tend to share it with people to show what we're trying to look at. And one of the ways I get people to try this is if you stand in front of your athlete or get them to stand in front of a wall. I know Tony Ciarelli does this with his athletes. You just push against the wall or push against your chest if you're the coach, so that they then will get the knee down and the hip forwards without leaning in and without leaning the shoulder in. So that's one thing. I've got a couple of things to people talking about Daniel Stahl. I'll play this. This is Viestin Hafsteinson's favorite throw of Daniel Stahl. Now we all know Daniel now. He's 163 kilos. So Blue, I know you like the big guy, and so but over the years we've had to work with Daniel on a number of different things. And he was a big kid at 16, 17. He was an ice hockey player, and he weighed 179 kilos, so he's 400 pounds. When he first came to Viestin, he was just a big kid, a big solid lump, and had a 9XL shirt. So the original idea was to try and get him in shape to learn how to throw. And it's really hard to learn technique at that weight. So when the first couple of years was just trying to get him skinny, and here he is. This is back in 2014. This is at Irvine. I know Tony was there and a bunch of other people. This was 66.89. This launched him onto the world scene. And technically this is still the best throw that he's ever done, because he was 139 kilos at that time. And so very skinny. Not, yeah, I haven't played it yet. Don't worry.
Oh, okay, perfect.
So I know that video takes a while, and I wanted to make sure that it was run, and I'll run it through a couple of times. But he was 139 kilos, and not really, you know, he was naturally very strong, but we had to work on the strength before we could get him to handle his weight. So this was him trying to throw. So you can hear Viestin before he let it go. If you can hear the sound, Viestin knows that it was the best throw. So let me play this a couple of times.
We're not getting any video. We still see the shot put picture.
Yeah.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
Okay, hold on. Let me try and share the screen again. Sorry, I'll go out trying to figure out how this works. So, okay. So, oh, let me go.
You might have the option to share screen or just to share individual pieces of your screen.
Okay, let me try and share screen again and see if I can pick up this thing. So can you see now, Daniel? Can you see a different image?
Nope, there it goes.
Yeah?
Nope, we go Irvine Discus.
Yeah. Can you see it now? Is it playing?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's choppy though, but.
Can you see that? Because I know in a group chat, the video is sometimes lagging. So
Yeah,
I can play it frame by frame as well if you want. So I'll go through.
Yeah, he was a lot smaller then.
Yeah. He was around 100. I think he was 134 or 5 kilos. So, and then he got big the next year and he couldn't throw. So we had to get him a little lighter. And then now his strength over 6 years is back up to where now we can allow him to be 163 kilos, because now he's just bigger than the other guys. So, you know, and a good big guy is going to beat a good little guy. That's the theory. So as long as it doesn't slow him down. Yeah. And if you watch Daniel now, you'll see even at his body weight, he's very, very fast across the circle. And that speed is always the key thing for him. So let me go and let me see if I can play this on frame advance. So, so let's go back. I just want to show you the start. As I said, what Viestin talks about is this going around the left side and not breaking the hip. So as the hip turns, you don't want to sit too much back. So we're trying to go around this inside of the left foot here. So knee over it and around the inside. So we don't want this fall to go away. So you can stay across on the inside. And if we go around here, see that hip is still staying now strong. A lot of people will sit too much and go inside. So this is important to stay strong here so that you can get this push off the left and then sweep. So now he's just facing the front and keeping the chest to the front. Now you'll see what April was talking about: low shin angle, knee forwards, hips forwards. This is what's really, really important for Viestin, with Cantor, with all the throwers that he worked with, also with Daniel. So, and this is why his strength was important, to be able to be strong enough to withstand his body weight. And when this was taken, he wasn't very strong. I mean, you know, strong relative to a lot of people, but for his levels, he wasn't very strong. And so it was about just, I think his bench press was 165, 170 kilos at this stage. So, you know, that was where he was. He's always been good at squats and deadlift. But so now you see this big right leg sweep and the chest forwards. So this very strong position, trying to keep face neutral forwards. Cantor would look away That was just an idiosyncrasy of Canter, but if you watched his shoulders and his arms and shoulders would still stay forwards. So even though his head would turn to the left. So then as he drives across, you'll see a big sprint, and now the right leg is that push off the left to the front. The right leg just stays underneath him. He lands on top of it, turns over the top of that right leg, so it's really easy to pivot around it, weight over the top of the right. And already at this point, Viestin knew that this was a great throw, because when the left foot comes down and the discus is back and he's still very strong and braced here with this left side, then that's a good throw. That's going to be a good throw there, because now the right foot just pushes to the front against this left side block and he stands up on it. So good block with the left side, good push of the hip into the throw. So very strong, nice finish at the top. And that's technically, that's the best throw that he's done. And Viestin still uses this in his presentations to show what he's trying to get Daniel to do. So that just shows the potential that he has. I'll see if I can show. Can you see this, or is it still on the, can you see the new image?
No, we don't see the new image.
All right, so let me stop and share a new one again. Sorry, guys, I don't want to
Oh,
take over too much of your time, but this is some fairly unique stuff here as well. This is slow motion film of Daniel. This was over 73 meters. This was the 5th round throw in the Diamond League in Stockholm. So this is his home city. And so he wanted to throw there. I don't know if you guys know, Mac Wilkins held the stadium record, but the actual stadium record is the American record throw. So this is where Ben Plucknett threw his 72 meters, but it doesn't count in world ranking terms. So it's no longer the stadium record. So Daniel was fired up in his home country to do this. So let's just see. This is a super slow motion of this film. And you can see that it wasn't very much of a foul. He should have saved it. He was just looking down at the finish. So this is probably as powerful as he's been. Big push out the left, stays back on it. Big sweep forwards, and you'll see that all he does now is he looks down. He's just lazy. So that he shouldn't have fouled that. There's no way he should have fouled that. So can you guys see it? Is that okay? Is it playing okay? There's not a lot of lag on this, so yeah, I was lucky. I actually had the flight scope machine here, and so we got a lot of interesting data. I had cameras from 3 angles, and then this was me on my phone. So you know, it's lucky I get to get in some good positions. So film is always interesting. So I have some stuff on Dakras as well. So who's managed by the same group, and I know Julian, his coach, is an excellent coach, does some great things, and Dakras is just an incredible athlete. I know he's a special guy and very good guy to follow. So yeah, so there you go, guys. I hope that was interesting for you. I'll stop sharing my screen, and then you guys can. So yeah. So I don't know if anyone has any questions. I work quite closely together with Viestin and Daniel, so so I know a fair amount of what they're doing most times. So they're actually on camp. We should have been in Los Angeles right now, but we weren't allowed to go. So they have a Corona camp in Växjö, Sweden, where they're still allowed to train. So and we're keeping the same training camp schedule. So I expect him also to do a few competitions. Today was meant to be San Diego, I think. So we're going to do. He'll probably do I think Daniel won't do a competition, but next week he might. So be interesting to see. Back to you, Blue.
Yeah, April.
Shaun, I'd like to have you, because the one thing that I learned from you at the IAAF clinic in Chula Vista that I had never even thought about or even concerned myself with was when you put your hand on my hip and I had to drive into your hand at the front of the circle in order to hold that block side. And I mentioned, you talked about Daniel being lazy, because that's exactly the same term. Anytime you foul like he did, even in the shot put, the kid relaxes that leg over the toe board, is because I always feel like it's because they relaxed the block arm. And so once you relax the block side, that leg has to kind of follow because it's that, keeping you balanced. But I'd like to have you explain how you explained to me. I don't know if you remember because it was in 2013, but please
No,
explain that. It was incredible.
Sure. It's about how to start at the back of the circle in the shot and the discus. The most important thing, as I said, is about keeping this hip strong. And the easiest way to do that is to try and keep it forwards on entry and trying to find ways to explain that. Some people luckily do it naturally. John Powell did this, and we used to talk a lot about these things. And so in trying to find a way to explain it to people, the easiest way that I knew how to do that, and which is what I was explaining to you there, was if you put your hand or the coach's hand on the hip pointer on the left side so that you can feel whether the hip is moving away or not, just gives you a reference. And so basically the way to think about it is to kick the left heel forwards and low. Don't let it get above 1/4 of an inch off the ground out the back of the circle. So you start the movement with the left heel kick. It drives forward. It's like you're stamping out a cigarette on the inside of the ball of the foot. Okay, so your weight is on the left. You're shifted over onto the left. Your weight is on the left. You're on the ball of the left foot, and you kick the left heel forwards to the front violently, but really low. And the reason that you keep it low is that forces the glute to tighten, and it forces the hip forwards. So, and that's enough energy in that just 1/4 turn kick of the heel to turn the system through 360 degrees. When people do a 360-degree turn, out the back as a drill, very often you see kids just pull themselves around and give themselves momentum. It's not about that. You want to just start with the kick of the left heel and let that energy take the system around. The system is the body on top of that rotation point. So you kick the left heel forwards, and there's enough energy in that to take you around 360 degrees because you're in balance and you're on the rotation point. So what then happens is if you do that and you turn through 180 degrees, your hip is then forwards, and all you do is you let the knee fall down and keep that hip strong. So the knee falling down, get that low shin angle that April's talking about, that forces you into that backward C position, driving across the circle. So it's just a way to teach people to do that. And when they understand that, for me, it was the easiest way to get people to understand that. And it seems to have made sense to April. So I'm grateful for that. And it's just kick that heel around and low, keeping the heel low. It connects the front chain, it connects the tendons, and you get that stretch reflex that you're looking for, so that then you get that automatic drive across the circle. And that's that left to left. The left foot, you push off the left foot, just off extension of the toe. You push, and that gives you energy to go across the circle. Very relaxed, very easy. And then you land back over the right in the middle. So then you can put all the force into the right side. But because you've pushed also the left to the front, you get that left side block very strong, and it gets the left foot down quickly. So flight time is very important. So if you look at Daniel, actually, he doesn't drive up. He doesn't kick across. He used to step down. Now he's getting a little more active with the right leg. But he's such a big guy, he can't drive across the circle because it forces him out the front and there's too much air time. So we try to keep air time down to a minimum. So you're stepping into the middle. You're pushing down and stepping down like you're stepping downstairs. And that means that you're fast into the middle, and the left foot comes to the front really fast, so that then it means you're back in the circle. And that's a John Powell trick. That John Powell would say, look, he would drive across the circle. He could see the left-hand post of the cage. And when he landed at the front, if he could still see the left-hand post of the cage and the discus at the same time in his right arm, then he knew he was back on it. And that was what he tried to do. He's the fastest guy going across the circle. He and probably Anthony Washington. So for a couple of little guys, they both threw pretty far, over 71 meters. So pretty good models right there. And if big guys can do that, take what they did, then I think you'll get something. April, did that make sense? Is that how you remember it?
Yes, and I remember when he had me explain how I taught the block, my hip, like I wasn't flexing into the hip. It was like my upper body was pulling away. And I remember at the very front of the ring, as you're bringing the discus through and you're about, it's starting to get ahead of your body, that's when you put your hand on my hip. And as I was pushing the discus around and squeezing, you like tried to push me back into the center of the circle.
Yeah.
And I had to force through your hand. By far the most, like, that jumps my kids almost immediately, just that portion. And like, you have no idea what a blessing that has been to me. So I truly
It's
appreciate
the biggest thing for me. I just gave a presentation to a bunch of Portuguese coaches, and Mac was listening in, and he talked to me for an hour afterwards. But one of my biggest thing is not to turn the right foot in the middle, but it's just pushing the ground away. So I do a whole thing on why you don't turn the foot, but you drive the hip. And that's, you have to understand that pushing from the middle of the circle, pushing the ground away. And that was getting you to understand what it was to drive against the ground. So by putting a bit of resistance, whether it's a hand on the hip, and understanding, so you understood what it was to drive the hip forward rather than just externally rotate the hip, rather than just turn the right hip. It's not about turning the right hip, it's about driving the hip into the block, because that will accelerate against the block and give you the acceleration, the whip, the sling finish that we're looking for. So some women are very, very good at that. You can still, they will get a more rotational finish because it's a 1 kilo discus, but from a male point of view with a 2 kilo discus, I think you've got to drive the right side into the left side block is incredibly important. It is in all the events, but particularly in the discus. So does that make sense?
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tom, did you want to say something? I seen you put your hand up. You got to unmute yourself, though. There you go.
How about now? Does that work?
You're good.
Okay. First of all, good to see you, Shaun. It's been a long time. What I appreciate from what I've seen is whatever that was.
That was my computer, sorry.
Oh, okay. When Shaun posts pictures and videos, how much easier all of these concepts are to understand. What's so difficult is just the use of words, and words have meaning to the person who's saying them, but not always to the person who's listening. So seeing the videos and seeing stop action pictures, the one of Rob Soufflon as an example, makes it so much easier to understand. If you ever, this group is great, but talking has its limitations. If you can ever do something like a learn by doing, where a coach gets up and presents, and then you try to imitate, so much better. Because when April was talking about putting a hand on a hip, okay, now I can see that. You know, you have the concept in your head. You have a picture. When you were talking about coming out of the back of the circle, I was thinking a drill that we used to use was trying to present a picture to the thrower of long arms. And I would say, try to imagine there was a coffee table in front of you, and you were going to try to sweep the dishes off the coffee table. So you use your left hand to sweep the dishes off. Things like that. And Shaun mentioned Tony and the left side. When you were talking about the South African position, I always use a visualization of leaning against a fence pole. Your left side would be vertical, not shoulders tipped, not diving into the middle, but just some random thoughts I had that, and when I saw Shaun's pictures, it was just, oh yeah, sure. I mean, I get it. That's what you're supposed to do. But you've got beginning coaches on this thread. You've got intermediate, you've got college coaches, you have international coaches, and you know, we're all looking at it from different points of view. If you want to talk about beginners, that's a whole other segment. College throwers, you know, people who throw 60 meters as opposed to 70, or 50 as opposed to 60. Each one is doing something different. So, but you know, the main thing I was thinking about is concepts. When you talk about moving through the ring, I always think of it like running. You go from right foot to left foot to right foot to left foot to right foot. You know, that seems to make more sense to a lot of people. We used to do a drill where you just turn and then sprint right across the ring just to get the concept of where your left foot stops and where the direction you go. So just some random thoughts.
Thank you. Yeah, I completely agree. That's why, like, this time, it was kind of like an open discus discussion.
Yep.
I think before when we did the hammer, it was like supposed to be focused toward collegiate, and I think later on we'll go back to like a high school hammer thrower, and then we'll try to get those in, because especially if you want to continue this. But hopefully we'll be back at practice, but we still want to continue the conversation though, because this is great. Thank you for your input. Go ahead, Ross.
Hey, y'all, can you hear me?
Yep.
Cool. I'm trying a new mic because in the last strength and conditioning one, I sounded like I was 400 yards away. I'm not a throws coach. I'm a strength and conditioning guy and a track and field middle distance guy. But this is really fascinating, talking about stretch reflexes and sort of like R&T feeding the problem by pushing the hip away from where feeding the problem into the bad position. And I want to kind of pose a question to the group. What do you all tell your athletes to do with their eyes when they're in these positions, or if they need to correct something? Because there's a concept around oral facial drivers where you can actually get people to move their body by focusing their eyes really hard in the direction that they want to go. I use it in some rehabilitative stuff as well. So what are our athletes doing with their eyes as they're trying to do this rotation and hit these positions and, you know, change their posture through a movement pattern?
Ross, I make them see where they want to go. A lot of kids pull their head as they're doing the 360, which allows them to over rotate out of the back. And so I volunteer at Buchanan, and I've been working with some of the kids there, and they have a perfect setup out of the back of the circle. When they come to the front, there's this soccer sign that goes right down the left or the right sector line. And so what I try to do is when those kids turn and drive out of the back, I want their knee and their eyes and their chest and their block arm focused on that soccer sign as long as possible and allow that right leg to travel. And so I'm a huge believer in where your eyes go, your body follows, because everyone knows the heaviest part of your body is your head. And that's because it's on a swivel. It's not on, it's on a plane that can move in any direction. So wherever your head goes, your body has to follow. And that's where kids lose that spinal line.
All right, so I had a plan to kind of go. I think we covered everything. I would say we didn't go really specifics in certain things like power position, stuff like that. But we'll save that if somebody has a super specific question at the end when we do random questions, and you really want to know about the power position and what you're supposed to feel. We'll you guys can adjust that then. But we have to move forward because I know we're almost like hour 17. So
hey, Blue, can I show one video?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's a demonstration of how I tried to imitate using the weight room and using what Shaun taught me. And so, well, I just share screen, right?
Yeah, this is the time you do it anyway, because I was moving into drills and sharing examples of stuff. Perfect.
Okay. I think Jure Summers may have actually done this drill with me.
I remember this video.
And if what I'm trying to get her to do is where I'm holding that angle of the rubber band against the hip, where that band is sitting is where the hip would be, or where the hand, you would place your hand on that hip. And so what I'm trying to get her to feel, I don't know if I can pause this, but is when she hits this position, if you notice her right leg, you can see the tension and how it's flexed. And she's trying to keep those shoulders back. And this is one of my German throwers. And so she actually, her shoulders, that's all the farther she can flex that shoulder back because she has a little bit of an issue with a rib. it's actually turned her shoulders in. And so that's how, just to kind of explain that aspect of it. But see how she posts into that sign and I can't pull her away? That is assimilating what I was trying to get Shaun to explain with putting that hand on that hip.
April, there's another variation of that that I might suggest to you, which is quite interesting. If you use two bands stuck together, if you put the band around her right shoulder, so then it turns around her, basically around her chest and waist, and then back to you, holding it behind that. So it actually wraps around her body. So then what she's doing is trying to drive the hips away, but it holds the upper body back while you're doing that and creates that backward C. You understand what I'm saying? You can use it. You can also use a big loop, a big band. It's very good for wrapping around the hip, but it holds the upper body back and allows the hip to work against it. So you can get these hammock fixings that go around a tree that are like 8 foot long with D loops on each end. For fixing a hammock too. You just hook one around the shoulder and then you can clip a rubber elastic band to the end. It works quite well. So just a variation on that.
Very good.
Shaun, would you happen to have any video of that? Not right now, but asking for the video. Would you happen to have anything like that?
Yeah, I'm trying to think if I can. I have so much of it's on my phone. I don't know whether I can get it up on my computer. So I can show you that setup somewhere. So if I find it, I'll come back to you and.
Okay, cool. And I'll contact you to try to get the video from your phone.
Sure.
I can't see it here.
So I can show you something of Jürgen Schultz that I always use as well. That him demonstrating the hip around drive and finish. So, which is useful. I'll look for it anyway. I'll come back to you if I have it.
All right. So back to the coaches. Is there any, after talking and explaining about discus, are there any drills that you specifically like to teach to help your athletes learn these kind of techniques and movements and feelings that you would like to share for other coaches to hear? Go ahead, April, and then David.
This is a drill that I like to use in order to create tension, like to have the whole body. And a lot of us, our kids become unbalanced, like I said, because they're using muscles that are compensating for other muscles that are weak. And so the drill that she's doing, this is Briar Robles. And one thing that I like to have her do is try to keep that balance. And the reason, if you notice when she comes through, Dre's also done this. I'm trying to keep her spinal line. And if you notice that left side, she likes to pull it because she's a little bit weak through her groin. And I don't know if I can slow-mo it. She does a really good job of getting that left heel on her sweep, doing its job. And her second pop-up, if you notice, is much more stable than the first one. And that's why I make them do a repetitive pop-up, is because when you're only doing one pop-up, you're reinforcing possibly the unbalanced version. And so you want them to control that, come back down, and pop back up. And if you notice her eyes, Ross, her eyes stay back towards the scales. And that helps a lot with her keeping that spinal line engaged, coming out of the back. Notice her right side stays really strong. Her left side was always her biggest issue as far as finishing through the front. Her right side, I feel, is very strong and very dominant, and she can control it much better than that left side, which is generally speaking all of our athletes' biggest issues, in my opinion. I hope that video came through okay.
No, it's good. Yeah, it worked out perfect. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, so this drill that I got was actually from Coach Pendleton, who I see is on the call. What he showed me was I used a cake form disc that you get at Hobby Lobby. he used it he actually cut a wooden piece, and you put a surveyor's flag in there. And what we were using it for, because he was helping me with one of my collegiate athletes, is he had a really bad kick out the front coming out of high school. So we were trying to work on keeping that right leg long. And so we would put this disc and that surveyor flag out there as a reference point, and we'd make him sweep around the left to kick that flag as he's coming through the middle. So that was one thing that I used, and it was a visual cue, and he could actually feel hitting that flag, and it really helped get him get that leg sweeping much better instead of kicking, and like it was a very high kick as he was coming out. So that's just one thing that I've been using, especially with new beginners right now, and try to keep them long coming out the back.
Blue, you're muted.
Duh.
There you go.
But like I was saying, so one of the things is that I like to use, I would say, are systematic problems that I have in my group. One of the first things I always go over, like those 360 drills. I'm really teaching 360 drills, basically like working them to get over the left and around the left with the right, and them getting that feeling of transfer of energy from coming from right to left, getting around and feeling that sweeping feel. And then that helps with them because a lot of the young athletes, they cut off that early. Like they try to go super early. Like we kind of talked about earlier. They try to cut things off. And it was crazy because one of my athletes, we were battling. She's a walk-on. She wasn't like the best like thrower ever. She was more of I think she ran cross country or something in high school. But anyways, she's like I would say like 145 pounds and threw almost 40 foot with the shot put as a walk on this year. And she I taught her how to like actually get around because that was her biggest thing, cutting off. Once she actually done that, it helped her use the grip so much more. And that's how she ended up like jumping by like 4 feet in a PR. So that's one of the big drills I work on. And then another drill too, that I picked up online on YouTube, was Daniel Stahl's coach that he had. It was more of a rhythmic drill. It was like a 1-2-3 drill from like a south position. It's like 1-2-3. You basically move into the power position from the south position. And it was like a rhythm of how that sound is supposed to make and how your body is supposed to catch the position. And I found that helpful like during the end season from them actually like trying to build rhythm because we spend so much time on the technical parts and getting those feelings, then we actually try to pick up more on the rhythm when we get toward the season so they know what that feels like and the timing feels like because, timing can get thrown off with different implements and different drills and stuff like that. Those are the 2 drills that I like to use. Anybody else would like to share, or we will go ahead and move on. You can just raise your hand if you'd like to share. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, not a drill so much, but trying to understand what Shaun was talking about. Because most coaches will talk about rotating the right foot at the end of the throw, trying to get their right hip around. And his view was, no, you just push against the ground. Well, what I'm wondering is, and what I believe is, the left leg block is what causes the right hip to turn. Think of your pelvis as one bone. It's not 2 separate bones. If the left pushes down and back, which we know from force plate readings, the only reaction is for the right hip to come around. So left hip pushes, or left leg pushes down and back, right hip turns. So there's no need to think about turning the right hip. It's what will happen. It's action, reaction. So I don't know if Shaun heard all of that, but I'd be interested to hear if my understanding is correct.
TP, yeah, it's So let me show you, let's see if I can share a drill again. This is Jürgen Schult demonstrating the delivery motion of the discus. So the Germans talk about drehen and drücken, which is turn and push, but it's a roll to the inside of the right foot and then a drive forwards. So let me see if I can share a video, see if I have any luck with this. So bear with me. I think it's this one. Let me see if I can play this. Are you guys seeing this?
Yep.
So if you look, so this is Jürgen demonstrating the right foot movement. It's a J shape with the hip.
Mhm.
So this hip comes, instead of rotating, it's not just an external rotation of the hip, but it comes out first to the side and then comes forwards. So the movement of the right foot, the right toe, is you roll to the inside of the right foot. That gives you a positive knee angle from which to drive forwards into the direction of the throw. With external rotation of the hip, it just rotates around. It doesn't give you any force driving forwards. So you want this force into a strong left block, as you're talking about. Left block is, of course, incredibly important. The German research is always about the importance of the left side block. In the shot put, the ground reaction forces in the left side are greater than the ground reaction forces in the left side, meaning the left leg has to be stronger to prevent the drive going forwards so that you get the transfer all the way along the arm into the discus. So in the shot put, the difference between Timmerman with his 22-meter throws and his 19-meter throws was that in the 19-meter throws, his hip would transfer 65 centimeters forwards, but in the 22-meter throws, it only came 40 centimeters forwards. So the left side block was so much stronger, so that drive had this impact that then accelerated everything through into the throw. So again, if I play this, if I let this play through, so you see the push is pushing into the ground by rolling the inside and driving the hip forwards. So it's roll and push. So you see how the hips are coming forwards into that left side block. So Jürgen hated the fact that this was shared. He didn't like this was super secret training, and he didn't want this information getting out. But I talked to him quite a lot. But for me, it was it's very important to see this backwards C in the strong position. So it's not just rotating the foot around; it's turning and pushing. I can go through a whole reasons as to why the hallucis longus underneath the toe is what's responsible for extension, and like a sprinter. So it's something that's important and valuable from that point of view.
Is the right leg extending, or just more so the left leg block?
The left leg block, but the right leg pushes into that left hip.
Mm-hmm.
It drives because you want to drive it forwards into the direction of throw. We're looking for all the energy to go into the direction of throw, but what we're trying to do is direct that into the implement, which is at the end of the arm. So there's a sling effect. And if you watch German discus throwers, they try to sling the discus. And even Mac, this is why I said Mac doesn't teach what he used to throw like, because he coaches to try and get this tremendous sling on the discus. And that comes from this drive, the energy from the foot, knee, hip, all the way through the chest, getting these connective tissues all the way through the arm, so that then the impact is kind of like if you're driving a car into a crash barrier, you know, the crash test dummies. If you drive into a wall, those dummies move really quickly forwards. So the safety people come out and they have an absorbent wall or a warder or something to prevent that block from being so violent. So we want to have the violent block, so that the violent block is this left side being strong, so that all the energy that we've given from the drive across the circle, the kick across the circle, the sprint from the back, and now this extra push from the middle out, all into this violent block, because then all of the energy is then transferred all the way down through the chain, through the arm, and into the implement, because that's what we want, right? That's biomechanics. That's what we're trying to do. So it's kind of like, you know, the speed you want to go across, you want to put all that into a violent block and transfer all that energy into the implement. So, and that's why this is a push to the front and not a rotation. With a women's discus, a bit like the javelin, some javelin throwers will also just turn this foot really quickly in order to give a block, because with the women's discus being lighter, you can get much more of a whip action it's hard to do it with a 2 kilo discus. You have to have more of a push. Whereas with a 1 kilo discus or a tall, skinny discus thrower can be much more of a sling at the end, like cracking a whip. So that's the idea. So does that make sense?
Yes. Speaking of which, I kind of want to dial back a little bit, just to talk about, because I kind of skipped over this, but I think it's important. The conversation of, since we're talking about left side block and using the ground, in what cases or how important the differences between the non-reverse versus the reverse throw, and then kind of, if you want to elaborate, anybody want to elaborate kind of on the on top of that, the more, some people teach vertical, especially in America. I don't know why, but if somebody could give some reasoning, and then the rotational into the block, or that kind of feeling of being in the ground versus like some people teach a jump like in that what I would say like Randy Barnes finish or old field finish, like in discus too. But yeah, go ahead, April.
Honestly, I go off of my athlete. I don't, I feel like if you teach only one style, you're creating a cookie cutter that not everybody's going to be able to have the same ingredients. So if I have an athlete that's built like Randy Barnes and built like Brian O'Field and built like some of those, that's why rotation was kind of developed, as to expand on this vertical explosivity that they had. A lot of times we have a lot of athletes, because we lose them to basketball and football. And so we have shorter throwers. We have throwers that are only 6'2" to 6'5", versus having what Europeans have and having these 6'9" athletes. And so when you think about the superpowers that some of those athletes that are on the shorter scale of things, you have to dominate or at least train them to use their superpower and not a superpower that somebody else that's much longer range has. So when I have a girl that's like 6 foot tall, I try to teach them more of the non-reverse, very linear. If you reverse, it's because your body you have no choice. It's not a taut reverse or a lift off of the ground type of reverse. But if I have a male thrower that's only 6'2", the only way to really compete against a kid that's 6'9" and has levers for days is to capitalize on the one thing he's probably stronger in, and that's going to be your lower body explosivity. And so as long as I can get that kid to generate more power through the ground, that's going to lift an athlete like that off the ground. And so you almost seem like you're teaching them to reverse, but you're not. You're actually teaching them to push so hard into the ground that a person of that level is going to naturally get off the ground sooner than somebody that's a more linear. And so me personally, I go off of my athletes' superpowers, and I have to focus on what their superpowers are and dictate their technique as close to those technical aspects as possible by maximizing what they have to offer.
Anybody else want to chime in? Thank you, April. Go ahead, Anthony. You got to unmute yourself, though.
There
There you go.
So same as April said, I coach high school kids, and my last high school kid was 5'8". The guy I got right now is 6'8". So they're not the same thrower. The rings are different, and especially spinning in the 7-foot circle with the big guy, which this is his first year spinning this year. Unfortunately, we didn't get a year, but I agree in the sense that you have to model after people who look like you. So Aiden, who I have right now, we're modeling Ryan Krauser. Cole Smith, who I had 3 years ago, who was only 5'8", we modeled Joe Kovacs, because that's, Aiden can't throw like Joe or Walsh. He would be flying out the front of the ring. So I agree in the sense that you have to do that. And a couple other things that we've talked about, I think a big key in understanding some of the stuff that's starting with the kids understanding positions, not just movement. And so they have to understand that the hip has to stay underneath the shoulder, has to stay on top of the right, because you see a lot of kids doing drills and their hips are behind them. And so the drill is lost because they don't have good position. The same thing going back, just thinking of things as we were going through the conversation. The start, I think a big thing is setting up the windup. So you have to set the windup over the left side to get back on the left side. And I don't see a lot of people in the high school level doing that. They just wind up and then they end up winding up over their right side. And that's a reason why they never get back over their left side. So it's important to understand position as much as movement itself. And that's, I think Tom brought up tempo. We work a lot on rhythm and tempo. And so the tempo is not always going to be high level, right? Because we're working on the rhythm of the throw. And then as we get better at it, we'll increase the tempo. And I think as far as teaching, that's a big key for kids to understand. There's a difference between rhythm and tempo, and there's a difference between positions. For example, like say, once again, loading the quads. It's really important at the high school level. They don't understand getting that knee out in front of the left foot. And then when they land in the right, it's the same thing. If that shin is perpendicular over the top of your right leg, you're not going to generate any force. So to be able to understand, that's why you have to have the hip forward so you can have the knee forward. And my cue back to Shaun for the kids is big toe into hip. I don't talk about turning. I just want you to push your big toe into your right hip and then block the left side.
I know you talked about one video I've seen that you talked about helped my kids a lot is like the hip flip in the middle.
Right.
You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, and that's like an EQ concept for them to understand, I would say too. Yeah. I would say moving forward, guys, I want to also go back to what we were saying about the non-reverse. If you could, Shaun, I hope you can elaborate on this, about the non-reverse and reverse. Like, what are the differences and the things that are important?
Here's the thing. Again, it's dependent upon the quality of athlete, but I think if you're an athlete, if you're an athletic athlete, if you like, a speed-based guy, the natural thing is to reverse, right? But the important thing is that the reverse happens after the throw. So the non-reverse throw is a very important part of the training, because that is very important to get the energy out of the ground. Now, if you're such an athlete that you then, after you finish and delivered, you go into a reverse to stay in the circle, then that's fine. The reverse is what happens after the throw. The difference is that too many people get into a jump delivery. So they're actually jumping into the finish, which is then you're not applying force into the ground. You've lost some of the ability to apply force into the ground. So Daniel Stahl yesterday, they're training in Sweden. Daniel throws with a Denfi tool at the moment, a 3.1 kilo Denfi tool. He'll throw standing, he'll throw a non-reverse, and then he'll throw with a reverse at the finish. Now, he threw 70 meters with a non-reverse and 7150 with the reverse, right? With a 3.1 kilo Denfi tool yesterday. So there's a little more energy into a reverse if you can do it, but the reverse shouldn't be at the detriment to the throw. It should happen after the throw. So you get all the energy out of the ground into that block, transfer it into the finish, and the reverse is what happens after the finish. So, and then that's to stay in the circle. So even Jürgen Schultz set the world record 74.08 with the reverse. Yeah, he threw with the reverse, and he still believes now that he had much more potential to throw further with that. But it was unstable. And in those days, in 1986, for the East Germans, he threw 74.08 in the world record, but then screwed up in the European Championships. And they said, right, we're not going to have you screw up in the championships. It's too important for us. So you will throw non-reverse. So being a good East German, he had to shift to non-reverse throwing, and was very, very good and very, very stable, and threw 70 meters only once again. but was very, very stable at 68 to 70 meters. But he still believes that a non-reverse throw has more potential if done right. So the difference is, though, use non-reverse as a drill and then determine whether you're effective to then go from a non-reverse to a reverse, because there's potentially more energy and a more dynamic finish, but it's only after the throw. It's only after the delivery. And if you're jumping into the delivery, then you're losing potential. Does that make sense? I think too many people have got caught up with Mac Wilkins in this big jump delivery. It's so hard to do that, and you got to have very, very special skills. And many people have tried over the last 30 years, and I've been around most of the American top guys that have tried to throw like Mac and have got pretty successful, but not perhaps as successful as some of their talent levels should have led to. So, they've been beaten by. Yeah.
What's Stahl's percentage of standing throws to reverse throws?
Non-reverse to reverse. So it's basically, you've seen the workouts, but basically they'll start off some stand throws, some half-turn throws, and then he'll do non-reverse, particularly in sort of early season part. Technical stuff it's a technical grounding is very much for non-reverse, and then finally we'll do reverse. So, but it's probably 50-50. It depends on a slam session. Like we do, he'll throw 4 times a week. Yeah. And so, but one of those sessions is a slam session where you just go out and try and throw like hell. And then it's not a technical session. It's you just go out, warm up, and then you throw, as far as you can, as hard as you can. And that's when you're not going to do some non-reverse there. The non-reverse are drills and is part of the throwing. And particularly when trying to work on things like specific strength, throwing with the Denfi tool, it's very, very good to use non-reverse throws with a Denfi tool. And the Denfi tool is the best thing for getting technique, because it gives you that length. It gives you that bit of a delay that creates more stretch reflex as well. So you learn the technique is much, much better with a Denfi tool. So for special strength, it's an excellent idea. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So it's, the goal is to throw far in competition. So that's a reverse throw. But if you'll note it, the reverse comes after the discus is gone. He doesn't release, he doesn't jump into delivery. Cantor was the same, very active, but throw and then reverse. So throw, fixed feet. They all threw fixed feet as an exercise, even in the shot, and it's very hard to do in the shot. It's hard to throw fixed feet, but they'll do exactly the same kind of numbers and things. Fixed feet throws are definitely a technical progression.
Thank you, Jeff. Go ahead.
Hey, so yeah, obviously appreciate the opportunity to talk, Blue. So kind of building off all these great concepts that have kind of gone on.
Just a second. Tony, can you turn off your mic, because there's a lot of feedback? Thanks. Go ahead, Jeff.
Hey, how's it going, guys? Jeff Klaves from UNCW. Kind of a jack of all trades coach. So obviously hearing all this, advanced technical stuff is great. And just want to kind of build upon the video that Shaun showed, obviously with kind of the back C, if you call it, obviously when you're able to hit a throw, correctly. And I saw a thing in the chat about commonalities to the jav. And it's something that obviously was a huge light bulb to me. One of my huge mentors is Jeff Gorski, obviously a great jav coach. And then also talking about, obviously Coach Puskys that does the Project Javelin Gold. And, this concept of this reverse C, I think is very important in terms of the power output, knowing that obviously the throw is happening behind the block. And so, a great concept of thinking of that, the pressure from the foot and the knee obviously is all in this preparation of being able to hit the hip. And so I think obviously these concepts of these reverse throws versus non-reverse throws, I think a very, I guess a good example is these javelin guys that are coming down the runway. And in that commonality of trying to put obviously some throws commonalities. So the javelin guys that get airborne, obviously into the release, all the power led to the airborne feature. All of the power obviously is leading to the reverse feature of that athlete. So I think obviously the pillar movement always is non-reverse. And, you know, that huge activation of the right and left side working together with that left side block being firm, and obviously having the foot and knee obviously prepare to them being able to push the hip. When you're seeing those big throws, everything is happening behind the block. So, you know, all of this stuff from the lower body, I've seen a lot of success in my coaching by obviously the closed nature of the upper body, the, you know, obviously almost, you know, we talked about Blue in the hammer talk about, you know, shutting off the upper body. And the better and better we get at being able to stay closed and less active with that upper body, we're able to hit these throws and really feel the ground and push from the ground to keep challenging and pushing the mark and obviously getting better throws out of it. And, you know, relating back to that commonality again, you know, obviously in the jab, when you hit a throw correctly, whether they're getting airborne or not, you see the finish actually still behind the block. You know, a lot of these elite level javelin throwers, you know, obviously on the world stage and the international stage, you see them finishing up, you know, which in the jab, it wouldn't make sense to obviously a beginning coach. Obviously you're thinking about trying to throw it out, but you're actually applying that force up. And obviously a big moment that, you know, continuing to learn, like with the discus, is now obviously that arm angle just changes. And obviously we're finishing as long as we can to maximize that radius and the centripetal force we're getting from being able to hit that implement. But, you know, kind of just wanted to add that point about, you know, the back C is a result of us doing the ground correctly, you know, and then the front C and the jab is a result of us hitting a throw correctly. And, you know, obviously now translating to the disc, you know, the reverse just comes from, you know, our ability to save a throw based on our power output. You know, it has, you know, not that we want to teach that jump to the finish like Shaun was saying. Obviously we want to avoid that. We want to work the ground as long as possible, you know, being able to get as much power.
Just to follow
Blue,
up
your
on
mic's
that.
not on.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're okay.
Yeah, I was just going to say, to follow up on that, remember at the end of the day, you know, the speed of contraction is very, very important. The amount of time that we have to deliver a discus or a shot is very, very short. So muscle contraction takes quite a long time. And also strength takes a long time to develop. It's 500 milliseconds. So the more that you can use on stretch reflex and these white fibers and developing that capacity is very, very important, because the ability to deliver power quickly, so within 100 to 200 milliseconds, is incredibly important across all events, but particularly also in the throws. So if you're using strength and muscle contraction, it just takes a long time. Whereas if you can use that, you know, force into the block and then transfer that energy through the white tissues and through the stretch reflex, it's much, much more effective. So, you know, just trying to be, you know, clear on what you're trying to do. And that javelin analogy, you know, it's the same thing. You're slinging the javelin. A lot of people that listen to Coach Hafsteinson, a lot of javelin coaches relate a great deal to his discus talk, because there's a lot of similarities, because that's what you're doing. You're sprinting across into a block, creating a backward C and transferring that energy into the throw. So it's very, very similar. It's very linear. That's the John Powell approach also. It's very linear. It's very direct in the direction of throws. So yeah, hope that just clarifies a little bit.
Thank you. So what I was saying before, I didn't know I was muted, that we're coming up on the 2-hour mark. And when I was thinking in this, I was thinking of next week of making a discus discussion part 2, so we can continue the agenda, because we're basically like only halfway through. And then allowing those people that still have to talk, and then I'll move on to a little bit of random questions, and then we'll go out and then start next week. But yeah, it's been a good discussion. Go ahead. I don't know, Jeff, if you re-raised your hand. And then, oh no, you know who's been waiting? Whoever is Pixel XL, I don't know who that is. You guys can talk. You guys have been waiting.
Yes, this is Mike Pendleton, throws coach in high school in Northwest Ohio. And I guess this is, Shaun, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, Shaun, this question's for you. You said that Mac Wilkins does not coach the way he threw. Can you kind of expound on that? And then I have a follow-up question.
Yeah, particularly in terms of the delivery. Actually, it's, you know, when you hear Mac talk and you know, I said I had a 2-hour conversation with him on Tuesday after a presentation I gave. But his main thing when everyone looks at Mac and watches Mac, and it's just incredible to see. And I was lucky enough to see him live and be around him, you know, back in the day, and just a phenomenal athlete like Wolfgang and things like that. But I've also seen many people try that kind of explosive delivery, and it's just not possible. It's just not possible to have that kind of speed and power that can go into that tremendous jump. So very few people can even match that these days. And so he doesn't coach that. He coaches now, and he's online and giving some presentations where he's much more, he likes the sling delivery that Lars Riedel does, and he tries to get people to coach that kind of long finish because he understands the benefits to it, that sling finish driving forwards. And so if you watch what he's doing with Eshan Haddadi, you watch what he's doing with some of the other athletes he's had involvement with the last couple of years, they're trying to get much more direction going forwards and not that jump going up, because it's the direction of energy into the throw that's important. So
do you think the javelin, he was a former javelin thrower, has something to do with that?
Well, Mac is just a phenomenal athlete and just had incredible feeling for the throw. And so, but he's such a phenomenal athlete that only phenomenal athletes can throw like him. So the reason that I follow more the model of John Powell, and I'm not the only one, Viestin, Hafsteinson models on John. I mean, you know, we were very close to John, and he was my coach, and so was a big influence on me. But those that have tried both ways, and Viestin, for example, trained with Mac and trained with John, he worked with both of them. They both coached him, and he tried to throw like Mac, and it's just not possible. But everyone can throw like John Powell, because John Powell's an everyman. John Powell's 6'2" and 240, right? And he wasn't tremendously strong. He wasn't tremendously powerful. You know, he was his second sport was bowling. You know, he wasn't the all-round tremendous athlete that Mac was. But it means that everyone can copy him. And as a model, and you could see that with Carol Cady, and everyone looks at Carol Cady's throw, 67 meters for a girl that was 5'6" tall. You know, incredibly impressive. So it's a much easier, more simple model to follow. And it's very, very simple to learn. And if you ever watch any of Viestin's talks, and there's some great ones on CoachTube that people can tap into, and he said that 80% of what he does is based on John Powell, and it's just because it's a simple thing to learn. You know, I can actually show you film of the two guys throwing side by side in Montreal 76. I blended the two together. And it's quite interesting because they have completely different approaches to the technique. So I talk about John being this left to left, turn around the left foot and sprint to the front, whereas Mac is much more about this big sweeping right leg and a big sweeping right kick across. So it's right leg out of the back into the right leg in the middle. And so the left to left versus right to right. But when you watch them side by side and understand the different approaches, it's actually very similar in the results and what they get. But it's much easier to throw like Powell. It's much easier to sprint across the circle and leave the discus behind you. And so when I think Blue was talking about an online thing from Viestin and talking about the rhythm, that's how he teaches it. He teaches, I've seen him teach a class of 10-year-old kids to throw the discus with reverse in 45 minutes. Right? He'll do that. And it's just this 1, 2, 3, 4. The 4 is the reverse. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you just teach the 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And then the reverse is the 4. And that's why you throw first and then you reverse. But he teaches kids to do that have never seen a discus before, will all throw with a reverse with good technique in 40 minutes. So it's again, it's a simple way to learn it. Does that answer your question, Coach?
It does. I do have a follow-up question. Thank you for that, sure. Shaun. Out of the back, and this maybe is for everybody, out of the back of the circle, I've been to many seminars where Mac, as well as John, and been to camps that John put on in Columbus, or actually Denison University. And Mac teaches, or did, that the left arm does not open up and stays inside the left knee or above the left knee. But yet I see more and more throwers and elite throwers, and even back in the day, they open that left arm up out of the back of the circle. So I'm just curious what everybody's thoughts are on that, because when you get a high school kid to do that, or even a beginner collegiate kid, a lot of times they over rotate when they throw that left arm out.
Yeah.
And I'm just
I think
curious
it's a
everybody's
mistake.
thoughts on that.
Yeah, for me to answer that, it's just that's a mistake. You want to keep the left side inside the. For me, in the discus, you want to try and keep it inside the left thigh, so that you keep the stretch back. In the shot put, it's a little different because you can have the big wide sweep, the throwing the arm out the back because it will come back against you, and so to a certain extent you can do that. It's about where it finishes up ultimately. Where does it have in the middle? So for me, it's easy if you don't have that big pull out the back, but some athletes like to do it. I just think it's dangerous because it gets the upper body too much involved. I'd rather start from the ground up and turn and push from the back. And so Mac didn't want it going past the left arm. John didn't want to go, sorry, the left leg. John didn't want it going past the left leg. When a lot of people watched Gerd Kanter throw, Gerd had a big tendency to pull the left head, the head away to the left. And they tried for 4 years to stop him doing that. And in the end, they just gave up because that's just him. That's just him. He has this freaky pull to the left. Now, the danger is whether the left arm and shoulder goes with it. So what they did was they stopped and said, well, can you keep your left arm pointing across? And then if the head goes, that's okay. But so he could then point the shoulder in the direction of throw, and that stopped him pulling off with the arm. So does that make sense?
It does. I noticed, like, for me, when I coach, I'm allowing sometimes the left arm to open up, but when they pull that shoulder, I stop it because I think that's when you fall into the bucket and you get heavy on your right foot and it collapses in the middle.
Yeah. If it doesn't come back to give the wrapped position in the middle, then it's a waste. Yeah.
Yes.
But sometimes some people in the shot particularly will use that and then come back against it because you get the stretch reflex coming the other way. You'll send the left side away and then stretch reflex will pull it back so that when you land in the middle, you've got a very good wrap position. In the shot, that's important because the shot's under your chin. So you get a good wrap. In the discus, the arm is behind you. It's easier to stay back without pulling the left arm away.
Yes. Thank you very much.
One of the things that I noticed, what you're talking about, because I noticed that same thing. I used to teach my athletes. That's why I mentioned it earlier. Like some people teach them to hold it, their left side down the line, and then like go through it, or some will teach them or open it or whatever. One thing that I've seen the difference of is when the left side is open. It's about a lot of it is about energy, like what I talked about, learning the energy of feeling of when your left side is going and when it stands still. And if your left side just opens up and keeps going and you stay with your left side, that's bad, right? Over rotation, you don't land wide.
Yeah, the question is whether it's a pull out of the back.
Yeah, exactly.
What are you using as your energy support? You need a push out of the back. So you need to start with the lower body. If the lower body starts, then the upper body should never get past the lower body. You're creating an X with the shoulder and hip girdle, right? So we turn the hips away, but we always want the shoulders to be behind and create this X, particularly in the middle. So because creating that X in the middle is what creates the stretch reflex in the throw at the finish. So it's easier not to let that X go the wrong way at the start. So for me, always the feeling is you don't want the left arm to go past the left thigh. You know, when you start, the lower body should always be leading. So, you know, and if you come out the back, if you can look down the right sector line and point down the right sector line and then sweep underneath it. So you want to kind of cross in the middle, that starts the wrap. That wrap process is important. So you see it in Kovacs in the shot. He's tremendous at just keeping that left arm pointed in the middle and then sprint underneath it. So you create that stretch reflex in the middle, incredible trunk strength. When you got someone like Kovacs, he's incredibly strong. He's not necessarily flexible, but he's incredibly strong. So therefore, flexibility.
You went out. Your mic went out. Yeah, you can't hear. Your mic went out. Oh yeah, but anyways, yeah, I don't know. One of the things that I found too with the left arm, sometimes it allows your athletes to be able to use the right side more when it's open. It's like going through the door basically. If you're opening the door at the left side, you go through the door, but they can't keep that door open with their left side. They got to be able to hold it back at that point where they're going down the line, that linear point. They got to be able to move their hips through. Well, like I said about that girl earlier, I was saying one of my athletes, she would always hold her left, but she couldn't get her hips through because it was like that door was closed in front of her. I don't know exactly if that was more so. I'll tell her to keep her left down the line, but her upper body, I'll tell her chest to open up and keep her head down the middle so her hips can continue to go through. Jere, go ahead and go. I know you've been waiting. Your mic ain't. We can't hear you either. Was mine on? Was mine on? I was on mute the whole time too. Oh, I was about to say, yeah. I don't think your mic works, Drake. So if it doesn't work, you can just put your question in at the bottom.
Okay, I will.
Oh, you're good. Look.
I think because I had it up.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really good at noise cancellation. Okay, so Shaun, I was saying I hope your mic works because you had mentioned that one of the issues with the reverse is that athletes become airborne before they finish the throw. And I was wondering, what does that really look like, at the point where the athlete finishes the throw and then leaves the ground? Or what cues can you give an athlete to help them finish the throw before reversing? We still can't hear you. Well, at least I can't.
Yeah, we can't hear Shaun.
Shaun, we still can't hear you.
Yeah. Tony, would you like to address that? I'm pretty sure you understand too.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, there you go, Shaun. Go ahead.
Okay. Sorry, I was just going to say, I think the non-reverse is a great way of learning how to get energy into the throw before you reverse, and particularly with a Denfi tool. It just allows you more time because it just stays behind. And learning to sling that discus or something. I do a lot of throws, particularly with young athletes or people teaching a throw, where we're throwing a bowling pin. And keep that behind you. And so basically you just leave that behind on the hip. John Powell would do these drills where he'd leave the discus behind and just run away from it and create that whip at the finish. So you get the understanding of what it is to sling into the finish. And then you can start thinking about how to add more energy to it. So having something that's a little longer than discus, because the discus, holding it in your hand, you'll tend to start pulling with your biceps. So with a bowling pin, is quite good because you can grip the handle without actually having to tighten your forearm. And with a Denfi tool, you can also just let the weight take the arm long away. So you learn how more to sling, like snapping cracking a whip. And that's something that will help your athletes to understand that feeling of slinging against the left side. And then if they then need to reverse to stay in the circle, that's another thing. Yeah, that you just don't want them to jump into the finish. You want them to finish the throw and then reverse to stay in the circle. It's just to keep yourself in the circle. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it answers my question. So basically, it's just a non-reverse with the exchange of the feet in your mind of the reverse.
Yeah, I think one of the key things to do that is you have to think linear. You're not thinking rotational. Discus is not a rotational event. It's a linear event. Yeah, you're throwing in the direction of throw. So you want all your forces to go into that. So you're talking about this. Mac talks about a double throw concept. So where he comes out the back and takes the discus forwards and then forwards into the delivery. So it's like a throw. It's this getting forwards momentum. So you want to try and keep people driving forward. So that sling and the feeling of the sling in the direction of throw will stop them pulling out the back and thinking too rotationally, which very often causes them to jump into the finish because they've already got momentum sending them around in circles. You want to try to stop that that rotational movement and sprint across. Holding the left arm straight will stop them doing that. Run underneath it, cross underneath it, create the X, and then throw forwards in the end. So a good thing is to throw a medicine ball or a small ball and throw it into a wall so they drive, or throw into the back of the cage. So they get used to driving forwards and not driving around. You want to kind of feel that slam into the wall. So I can show you a drill on that if you wanted me to. So
Dre, one thing that also I think would explains that too is when you're essentially pulling on the discus, it's more of a pushing the discus. The discus should be in front of your hand is a good way to think about it. So a lot of kids, I know you cage, the right side of your cage is always been your nemesis. And a lot of that is because when you hit that block side, you're leaving that discus behind your right shoulder instead of crushing into the block side after you've been pushing that discus. That discus needs to start getting ahead of your shoulder as you're transitioning into that left side. And so it's essentially a push. You're pushing that discus from the power position more so than pulling your upper body away from it. And I think kids have that tendency to believe that you're dragging an implement. When you drag an implement, mentally you think about, okay, I can't apply any force to it. That's not the right way to think about it. You're dragging that implement, but you're also having an active stretch through that arm so that when that left hits, you actually start applying force and pushing that discus as your body is twisting and unraveling in a sense. To where if you look at some of the photos that he showed, that hip staying back and that quad being in that stretch reflex, that C position, that's where the discus is actually traveling around that. And then you chase that discus from that right leg into that left leg. And that allows that discus to go linear rather than to go adjacent from wherever you've pulled that shoulder out of the throw. Does that make sense? That's
yes.
A lot of words.
Yes, it makes sense to me.
It's funny because the whole time he was talking, I was imagining Jure throwing. I knew you too, April. Like when you were saying, like we all know exactly what she's talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jeff, go ahead. You'll be the last person, and then we'll close this out, and then we'll come back next week. Hopefully, we can get everybody back. Go ahead, Jeff.
Hey, and I guess I kind of was thinking about the question too, and what does a non-reverse throw look like? I think it's essentially just the right foot still being on the ground. So Dre's initial question, going to Shaun about it, I think it just relates to, what are you supposed to look for as a coach? You just want to make sure that, the right side being the motor, the left side being the brake, that you don't want to lose contact with the motor. So the right side, and we know obviously it may drag for some, obviously leading to the release when you're still doing a non-reverse throw, but just having the right foot in contact with the ground. And obviously, Shaun, April, if that's, you guys were talking about the upper body and obviously pushing the implement, but I think I was obviously talking about a situation just from the ground up.
Go ahead. You can play the video, Shaun.
Sorry, I was just going to play this. This is Franz Kruger. So this is to get this right side pushing into the left. So if you can hear that, let me just play that again. Can you see that?
Yeah, you can put repeat at the bottom too if you see it. It's like a little repeat sign.
Sorry, it's my mic. I have the volume on here and the playing. So you see this right hip driving forwards?
Yeah.
The right hip drives forwards into the left side block, and then this stretch sling. So it's a very good drill, and the fact that it comes back to him is an important thing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. All right. Thank you guys for tuning in. Hope to see y'all next week. Y'all have a great weekend, and see y'all later. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Blue.
Thank you, guys.